Hi there, how you doing?
Good, how about yourself?
Good. We're just seeing what you're up to today.
We're just out doing checks on irrigation.
Okay. I'm not sure if this is private land or not. Are you allowed to be on this chunk of land?
Yes, we are. Have a good day.
Their food doesn't come from a supermarket. It all starts right here. That's where their food starts from. You know, and if they keep on us, you know, red tape thrown at us, we're not allowed to keep, you know, doing what we need to do. You know, where's your food going to come from?
But to allude to conspiracy, I think there's political motivation behind it. I'm very positive there is.
Hey guys, welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. They tried to feed their cattle and now the government wants to throw them in jail. This is a story I think you should pay attention to. But real quick, before we get into today's story, Meet My Neighbor Productions are a nonprofit that focuses on building documentaries around rural America, agriculture, farming, promoting rural life, as well as our Rural Youth Development Fund, where we help kids in rural areas get into programs to help them learn outdoor skills, essential life skills. And many of you probably know that we also have gotten into farm relief in recent years. While a lot of politicians were sitting on their thumbs in North Carolina, we actually went out and helped over 30 farms get back to growing this season. Meet My Neighbor Productions is the main philanthropy of this channel, and we are trying to help raise funds to keep the nonprofit going strong for the second half of this year. So please take a moment, make a donation, even if it's just donating a Starbucks. Every little bit helps us achieve our goals in promoting rural life. So when drought hit Canada in 2023, there was a sweeping ban on irrigation to protect salmon. This ban hit about 400 ranches and farmers. They could not irrigate, they could not water. During this time, they did have a lot of warnings that went out to farmers and ranchers. They had a lot of fines that went out to farmers and ranchers for either watering unknowingly because they didn't know if their well was impacted or not. There was a lot of miscommunication. One ranch in particular got fined $1 million and they are potentially facing jail time. One Plus Cattle Company run by Erik and Gaylene Buff has been singled out by the Canadian government to make an example of them. And the Canadian government has a weak case in this. We're going to get into what's going on, what this has to do with a rancher from Utah, and the weak case the Crown has against these ranchers. So One Plus Cattle Company is located in Westwold, British Columbia. The ranch was established in the early 1990s and has grown steadily, providing quality cattle to regional markets while maintaining a reputation for ethical land stewardship. They've been kind of a low-key ranching family, just trying to grow food, run an honest business, take care of their kids. Locals describe them as hardworking, principled people. Okay, that's who we're dealing with here. Gaylene is actually, she grew up in Utah. So she is part American citizen. She married her husband, moved to Canada, and she became a rodeo star. She's a 3-time Canadian Finals rodeo qualifier, 4-time Calgary Stampede qualifier, 2-time Rodeo Houston qualifier, 2008 Canadian Rookie of the Year, 2008 Calgary Wrangler Tour Finals champion, 2009 Canadian Ladies Barrel Racing champion, 2011 Cowgirl of the Year, and 2-time Canadian Prairie Circuit champion. You know, this family kind of reminds me of the Heartland series. When you read about them a little bit, they really did not mean to do anything wrong. And when I get into what's happening or what they have working for them in their case towards the end of this video, I think you'll see how ridiculous this entire thing is. But clearly the Canadian government, the Crown, is trying to make an example out of these people. And I think that brings into a question a whole lot of other things. Should governments be using criminal prosecution to make examples out of people? I think that what's happening is absolutely wrong. So let's talk about this water ban, okay? So it happened back in August 2023 when we had record-breaking droughts up in Canada. During that time, the government issued a fish protection order targeting the Salmon River waterbed in the Thompson and Okanagan regions. Under the province's Water Sustainability Act, ranchers and farmers were banned from irrigating forage crops between August 16th and September 30th to protect endangered Chinook salmon that were in spawning season during that time. Officials tried to argue that even shallow water extraction could reduce surface flow levels critical to salmon survival. The watershed had reached level 5 drought severity, the highest classification for drought. But many people in the community questioned the science behind this, including hydrologists who said that shallow water wells had absolutely no impact on the Salmon River. Given the geological diversity of the region, forage growers pointed out that they weren't even diverting water directly from the river, and that vegetables, orchards, and other water-intensive crops were exempt from the ban. So this ban didn't hit everybody. It was singling out ranchers. It was singling out the meat supply. How in the world does cutting off the ability to feed cattle have anything to do with water if it's coming from a different part? If it's not even coming from the Salmon River Basin? So from the get-go, this water curtailment, the science didn't back it up. Clearly this didn't go well with the residents. About 200 people packed a building in September of 2023. 7 members of the Legislative Assembly attended the meeting, including BC United leader Kevin Falcom, who basically said, if government refuses to answer your questions, I would turn my freaking water on. So this wasn't something that was accepted across British Columbia. It wasn't accepted by the residents. It wasn't accepted by state officials. Nobody liked this curtailment. Nobody could understand it because, like I said, there were certain groups that were exempt from it. The ranchers in particularly were not exempt from it because they were watering cover crops, forage crops that they didn't feel were necessary. Meat's not necessary to the Canadian government, to the Crown. And their wells didn't really, according to hydrologists, didn't really have an impact on the Salmon River Basin. So the Buffs, their land, like anybody else in this area, depended on groundwater irrigation for their forage crops to be able to feed their cows. This initial ban happened in 2023, okay? But in 2024, provincial water workers visited the area and met with some ranchers to discuss the ongoing enforcement of this water ban. The meeting ended abruptly. I haven't found a reason why it ended abruptly, although I'm sure some of you in Canada, some of you who have attended that meeting could tell me what happened there. But basically, it didn't turn out too well. Weeks after that meeting ended, and I'd be curious to know what went on in that meeting. I wish there was a recording that we could watch, because just weeks afterwards, the Buffs were charged. They were charged with irrigating forage crops during the August and September period where they were banned from doing so. They were also charged with obstructing provincial officials, a charge that carries steep penalties. We're going to talk about that in a second, because if they're convicted of that, they could face up to $1 million in fines and 1 year in prison each, effectively, as I think Secretary Rollins put it with the mods, orphaning their kids, right? Because they're going to jail. One of the biggest things about this is that meeting that took place that ended abruptly. They're charged a couple weeks later. All of these other ranchers, these 400 or so ranchers that were impacted, 400 ranches and farms that were impacted, there were fines that were given out. There were warnings that were given out to those people. But the only people charged for violating this watering with a criminal charge were the Buffs. That's where one of the big mysteries is. Is this just a clear case of government overreach, of somebody who got their feelings hurt and decided to use their power against a citizen? That's absolutely wrong. Some people say, well, they have the most evidence because their ranch is visible from the road, so you could see it if people were driving by. Because this hasn't gone to court, we don't know what evidence they actually have against the Buffs that they were irrigating during this time. The obstruction charge, though, like I said, alleges that there was some sort of confrontation between these officials and the Buffs. And what we know is that the Buffs were at this meeting with the officials a couple weeks earlier that ended abruptly. Now, if the Buffs were outspoken, if they were intelligent people at that meeting, if they made good, strong arguments that the Crown couldn't back up, and they felt that they were going to be a problem, it wouldn't be unusual for the Crown to punish them as a form of symbolism to the community. Look who we can go after. We're going to go after these good people. We don't care what they do for the community. We're going to go after them. We're going to put them in jail. We're going to fine them. And that's what the local MLA Stone says about it. He says that basically in this case, the government's trying to hurt these honest people that are just trying to feed their cattle, and he called it a disgrace.
Many of you have noticed that we keep wearing these leather patch hats that say defend the right to farm on them. These leather patch hats support our nonprofit, Meet My Neighbor Productions. You can get your hat at Yanasa Trading Co. and help us defend the right to farm through education, outreach, and, as we've been doing over the last couple of years, farm relief efforts. So get your leather patch hat and let others know that you defend the right to farm.
Okay, so what happens now? So the Buffs went to their first court hearing at the beginning of this year in February 2025. We haven't seen this case progress. I think that the Canadian government, the Crown, has a really weak case against these people. And I think that when you have a weak case and you move forward with charges and costing people a lot of money, I don't know how it works in Canada, and you know, I think it should work this way in the U.S. Whoever that person is should have the right to turn around and sue the government for what they're doing. And those officials should lose their jobs for pressing charges. Number one, they have the burden of proof is on the Crown, even in Canada. The Crown has to demonstrate that there was a direct impact from the shallow water wells on the Buffs property to the salmon streams, which means they're going to have to do advanced hydrological studies, which may or may not give them a definitive answer of whether or not these shallow water wells far away from the salmon streams, far away from, you know, the salmon water basin would have had any impact on the salmon in the first place. Because at this point, in order to charge these people, they have to justify that banning them from using their well would have had any impact anyway. Chances are, according to a lot of hydrologists who have looked at this case, there is no way that their shallow water wells would have had any impact on those salmon streams and rivers. And in many places throughout Canada, a lot of these little shallow wells do not have any impact on these endangered salmon streams and rivers. They also have to prove that the Buffs knew that their well was actually impacted by the ban in the first place. See, in 2023, when they threw this ban out there, they had exempt a bunch of people from it, like orchards and certain people with certain types of wells. And the shallow water wells, like I said, they typically don't have any impact. So based on the confusion and the clarity or lack of clarity coming out of the government officials during 2023, they have to prove that they were clear and concise and that they knew that they weren't supposed to be using their well. I think that's going to be a hard position for the Canadian government, given the amount of loopholes that they provided during this ban to different groups, different types of well users. It does seem as though they were specifically targeting ranches, though, meat production. And I think all of that goes into ambiguity of a lot of the orders themselves. These blanket orders that are thrown out there that impact areas that may not even need a curtailment, that have plenty of water, those all can be challenged in court. So just if they're coming after this couple, they haven't even solidified their case from the standpoint of that their order itself can be challenged just from how broad it was. They would also have to prove criminal intent, and I think this even goes into the obstruction charge, because in order for the Crown to say that they did something criminally wrong, that would mean that they would have had to knowingly been doing something to prevent officials from being able to access some information, to physically block them. It sounds like in a lot of what I have read about this case, now I could be wrong, maybe they were deliberately hiding something somewhere, but it sounds to me like there was a confrontation during this meeting, and 2 weeks later they decided to press charges. I mean, it doesn't look good on the government's count when it's their word against theirs. I mean, basically the way things look on the record is that they had a disagreement, they didn't like them, and so they went after them. But I think it's going to be even harder for them now to prove any criminal intent of obstruction of justice, especially something that was just verbal in a meeting. That's not really that's not criminal intent for obstruction. So they don't really, I don't think they have a case when it comes to any of that. And a lot of this also comes down to selective targeting of individuals and disproportionate penalties for people. Like I said, you had 398 people, one family, a husband and wife, are being threatened with jail time and threatened to be taken away from their kids. A good family, the wife's from our own country, Utah. One family has been presented with criminal charges. I didn't get anything that said that they had gotten warnings beforehand or fines beforehand. All the other people who violated this ordinance were either fined or received some sort of warning. One family. So it does seem very, very targeted, especially, like I said, the fact that they were all in a meeting a couple weeks prior to their being charged. There are also agricultural and animal welfare considerations that the Canadian courts have recognized in the past, where if there's an emergency order in place, but somebody needs to supply, water for their livestock or supply water to feed their animals to keep their animals from dying, or if it could cause irreversible harm to their agricultural business, a lot of times the courts have ruled on the side of the farmer or rancher in Canada, saying, they had to do this. It was out of a necessity in order for them to survive, in order for the animals to survive. And I think even in this case, again, the Buffs have a reason to say if they did water and they did water from a well that was somehow connected, that they had to do it in order to maintain their animals. They had to do it in order to keep their agricultural business from being permanently damaged. They could make that argument. So I think this entire case is complete BS. I think that the Buffs are people that are being charged to be made an example with. I think that somebody had a problem with their interactions with them and decided, we're going to get you for obstruction of justice. These are the types of things that I feel, we need to turn it around and investigate the officials. Investigate those who are using power in places where it shouldn't be used. And it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary force in this particular situation. But they would rather orphan a couple kids, fine these people to oblivion, and send them to jail, destroy a family, over salmon. Over protecting salmon in a river or stream that may not have any hydrological connection to the wells on the Buffs' property. They would have a hard time proving that they do, which means that the law wasn't really legal in the first place. See where all this is going? So anyway, guys, that is a story that I hope you guys follow and support, because these types of things happen not just here in the United States. They've been happening all around the world. It is an attack on ranching, it's an attack on farmers, it is an attack on food supply, therefore an attack on all of you. Anyway, guys, stay tuned. I've got more for you this week.
Ancient eras and natural selection have refined and tailored pristine fibers with the resilience for today's days. Evolving beyond the last ice age, bison wool is nature's most dependable activewear. Buffalo Wool Company, 100% proven by nature, 100% American made.
Check out the Buffalo Wool Company collection at yanasatradingco.com.